we welcome you here today and are very grateful that you have chosen to join us. I want to first acknowledge Ronnie Pollock, if she has joined us, who is the Executive Director from the Native American Community Center. And I wanted her to be able to acknowledge the ground today and give some thoughts if Ronnie is with us. Okay, I don't see Ronnie yet, but I am going to proceed again. My name is Sarah Taylor of Eleversity. Eleversity is a division within Heritage Christian Services, which is here in Rochester, New York, as well as Western New York. Through Eleversity, we provide an array of services throughout New York State, helping organizations improve internal capacity, offer an array of staff development opportunities. And this year, we have been very privileged to provide services around the state related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I also want to acknowledge our director at Eleversity, Christopher Frank, who is working behind the scenes. We are also very grateful for our sponsors today that have sponsored this series and have invested in we call something that is necessity and critical. We are grateful to the Greater Rochester Health Foundation, Excellis Blue Cross and Blue Shield, as well as partnering Univera, the Oshai Foundation in Buffalo, as well as an array of staff here at Heritage and Eleversity, our leadership team. We are very, very grateful to all of our partners, as well as Erie County Commission on Women and Girls. So again, I welcome all of you here today to a topic that is not often talked about openly. We are going to have some conversation today about women of color and white women and reimagining allyship. And I am happy to share with you just quickly how this journey began, how we got started with this journey. Our journey started a few years ago when I got no to a couple positions that I applied for in this community, CEO and executive director roles. From that point, I began to talk to other women of color, Latino women, Middle Eastern women, African-American women that said, I am highly qualified, I have the experience, I also gotta know. I wrote my story in the Democrat and Chronicle, and that story went all over the country. And women contacted me and said, me too, I gotta know, I am qualified. And that's where the movement that I call the Women of Color movement started, with me getting to know and talking not just about my story, but hundreds of women of color that are qualified and often apply for positions in organizations that serve large numbers of minority populations. But when you look at who are leading the organizations, they don't look like me. Many of us are qualified to lead. So the movement began at that point. In April 2019, we convened in Niagara Falls over 100 women that came from all over the country and talked about how do we advance opportunities for women of color. And through that, I was happy to meet a number of amazing women in Buffalo, in Syracuse, and all over that said, I am with you. I stand with you. How can we move forward in a strategic way? That spring of April 2019, I also met the CEO of Heritage Christian Services, Marisa Geithner, who stood with me not just by words, but by action. She acknowledged that she was privileged. She was acknowledged that she wanted to use her privilege and she wanted to use her voice. And she shared the work that was being done at Heritage internally to address diversity, equity, and inclusion. And from that, she went on TV with me and talked about it on Many Voices, Many Vision before the conference. And fast forward, in the summer of 2019, I began to work alongside her here at Heritage. So I am proud at this point to introduce the president and CEO of Heritage Christian Services, which is also a division within Eleversity, is a division under her auspice, Marisa Geithner.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. It has been a journey already, and I can't wait. I can't wait for what's to come. Recently, we've been asked a lot, and likely because of the success of the Women of Color Summit and the Colorise series, why Heritage Christian? Why Eleversity? Why are we so involved and so passionate about creating welcoming and inclusive space that embraces difference? Well, quite frankly, because that's the underpinning of our mission since our inception 37 years ago. Most people saw that lived out through our commitment to walk alongside those with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and yet our mission doesn't stop there. It encourages us to create a living and working environment that provides support and respect for each individual's gifts, strengths, and needs. It drives us to provide opportunity to learn, to mature, and to grow, ensuring a life of dignity, worth, and expression to which all are entitled. Those are actual words of our mission statement written over 30 years ago. At Heritage Christian, we take that call seriously, personally and professionally. We're called to support our community in healing and improving. And with 3,000 employees strong, we know the impact we can have if we work every day to meet that call of action. So let's get started today with some ground rules. As with each Colorise session, today is about creating safe and brave space for us to introduce conversations that need to be had. Let's begin by setting some rules around the space we'll create in this virtual room. Let's take space, brave space for ourselves, space to be vulnerable and share how we feel. And let's hold space for others. Embody space and philosophy in both our verbal language and our body language today. Listen with our heart and listen with an intention to understand. Let's be curious and not critical. Share only our own perspective and stories. It's not our place to share stories of others unless, of course, you have their permission or you've been asked to share on their behalf. In those cases, try and share those stories without identifying factors. Today, as Sarah explained, we're going to talk about allyship and we're going to dig in together. These are conversations we need to be having together more and more. We're going to explore with this rock star panel their experience and their views. So to get us started, I'd love to introduce and welcome Dr. Karen King. Karen's going to provide an overview of the research practices and realities related to allyship. Dr. Karen King is the Commissioner of Public Advocacy for Erie County and the Executive Director of the Erie County Commission on the Status of Women. The Commission works to provide resources to the women and girls of Erie County to ensure that they participate fully in matters that have an impact on their own lives and toward elimination of gender-based discrimination and the promotion of women's economics, societal, and political empowerment. Dr. King has served as an adjunct graduate faculty member in the Higher Education Student Affairs Administration program at Buffalo State College and in the Graduate School of Education at the University of Buffalo. She's developed and taught courses and conducted workshops on popular media culture, social justice advocacy, multicultural competence, privilege, gender, race, and class. Dr. King's research interests include examining the role that gender, race, class, and pop culture play in informing women's and girls' identity development and access to opportunity. She serves on the New York State Council for Women and Girls, the board of the Family Justice Center, the executive committee of the University at Buffalo's Gender Institute, the Minority and Women Business Enterprise Utilization Advisory Board, and the Erie County and City of Buffalo Joint Certification Committee. We are blessed to have you join us today, Dr. Karen King.
Thank you, Marisa. That's quite an introduction. It's just so exciting to be here with all of you today. And I have several board members from our commission, our advisory board chair, Tiffany Lewis, and of course, Marisa Vega, who's a member of our commission advisory board, is one of our panelists, and some colleagues and friends who are joining us. So that is just wonderful. just to create some context around our conversation, obviously we are at a critical juncture here. We've been here before, and for Black women and women of color, they're in that space every day. There has been a huge response from the white community this year to addressing longstanding forms of structural racism. And words like white supremacy and white privilege are all of a sudden appearing in the popular mainstream vernacular in media, which, you know, you hadn't really heard too much of, you know, in the academy, in higher education, you certainly heard those conversations. So to me, as someone who's studied popular culture, when you see this language or these narratives starting to crop up in popular spaces, that's a sign that there is some type of movement going on. The question is, can we sustain it, and can we guide it in a way that is going to create real systemic change? And at this moment, we have a decision to make as white women allies. We have a decision to make in terms of how we want to proceed. There are a plethora of opportunities that have been presenting themselves this last year between, you know, workshops and coaching sessions. I mean, every day my inbox is flooded with opportunities for training and discussion and to join in these conversations. So clearly, you know, there's a need, there's a desire, or as we say, an appetite for it. And of course, because we are in America and we love money and capitalism, there's a way to monetize it. You know, so, but, you know, we want to be curators of good work. We want to be able to invest in the research and the time that it takes to do this work. And just briefly, the commission, of course, is committed to work, and the work we do is through an anti-racist feminist lens. So everything we do through the Commission on the Status of Women is informed by that lens. And the work we do, the programs we create, and, you know, we have work to do as well. And we have to continually be interrogating that process. And we are engaged in that work vigorously. But the other piece of this is when I met with Sarah over the summer, and we connected immediately, and she asked me to speak at the Women of Color Conference, I talked about the importance of figuring out a way to create an allyship model, right? Because what I'm gathering from the research that I'm doing as a researcher is white women want to help, they want to do more, they want to become better educated, they want to know how to broach conversations, what are the right words to use. There's a learning gap here, and we aren't always sure how to proceed. There's the desire and the passion, but not necessarily the knowledge and the history to frame the conversation. And just one more thing, and then I promise I'll stop talking. The important pivot point here this year has been, we need to start talking about white supremacy and white privilege as systems that create structural racism. We historically have talked a lot about racism and minorities, and we use a lot of code language to talk about inner city and underprivileged and underserved, and we talk about the impact of racism. But what we really need to start doing is talking about the impact of white supremacy and structural racism and white privilege, and the role those systems play in how our lives are lived out, you know, daily. And we have to do more work around that as white women. We have to take and own that responsibility and put those opportunities in place for ourselves, and not necessarily expect somebody to show us the way. You know, we're gonna, and that means there are gonna be some missteps. We're gonna say things, we're gonna put our foot in our mouth, we're gonna be like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Yeah, that's gonna happen, you know, because creating systemic change is hard work, and it's messy and it's painful, and I can't wait to hear what everyone has to say today, and thank you again. How's that? Is that good? Good?
It sounds great. I can't wait to get messy with you. And I so appreciate you sharing that. Despite our own insufficiencies, despite our own lack of confidence, it is not a reason to not move. And I want everybody to hear that loud and clear today. Thank you so much, Dr. King. Sarah, do you want to get moving with the rest of the panel? Excellent. All right. So before I introduce every panelist formally, which I'll be happy to do, I wanted to just have a quick warm up. And I wanted to ask each of you in a minute or less, because we have so much good stuff to cover, if you could just explain in your own words, what does allyship mean to you? So let's go ahead and start with Sarah.
Wow, I have a minute, okay? Thank you, Marisa. I think for me, allyship is about authentic relationships that are not defined by your terms. And I'm talking in terms of women of color, me, speaking for me, for a white woman. Authentic relationships that's not defined by your terms or by your needs, or your need to feel fulfilled, or your need to check a box, or your need to have that one Black colleague that you call on all the time. It's about partnership at all levels, accountability, and it's really also about taking risk of going against the norm. And that's what allyship is to me.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. Joni Parker, how about you? What does allyship mean to you?
Well, yeah, first, I'd be remiss not to thank all the panelists who are here and Eleversity for pulling together this very, very important conversation. So much gratitude there. Marisa, you know, I think for me, I see allyship as a lifelong process versus an identity. And it starts with a lot of internal work. You know, when it's internal, you got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I have to embrace and understand my biases. And if you have not taken the Harvard Implicit Bias Test yet, I highly recommend it. It was quite an eye opener for me. I needed to understand my privileges because I got trapped in that barrier of, you know, I had barriers too, right? And true, Joni, but your color wasn't one of them. And I had to, it means getting out of my bubble and understanding the world in which I live in. So my, you know, what I was taught is very different from the realities. Living as a white person, I had no idea of the full impact of the barriers for a person of color in this world. And talk about missteps. You know, I have to learn to embrace those gifts. And I make missteps all the time, to quote Karen. And I am fortunate to have friends and colleagues who are willing to point that out. So embracing them, it means taking action, all right? Everybody needs to get comfortable with not being afraid to have a difficult conversation with family and friends. That was tough at first. And I've, with practice, have developed some tools for that. And it means leveraging my position that I have at work to listen deeply and influence policy and influence practices and education across the agency.
Thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate you sharing, surrounding yourself with people who will have the courage to be honest with you and help you accept feedback. Those are sometimes the people we want to avoid. But welcoming those people into your life, the people who are going to be very, very honest with you, are so important in this journey. Just as Sarah said, very authentic and transparent relationships. Thanks, Joni. Caitlin, how about you? And do you prefer Kate? I see Kate on your nameplate. Do you prefer that?
Yeah, Kate's great. Thanks.
Okay,
Marisa.
great.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here this morning. So allyship, I love what everyone has said so far. For me, I think about the features of allyship that I try to practice. And the first is that allyship is not a spectator sport. And, you know, that's a regular challenge to not have it be just something that we're talking about, but figuring out how to move to action. I also believe that one of the features of allyship that's hard as a white person is that it's daily work, and that as a white person that doesn't have racism staring us in the face every day, it needs to be intentional and deliberate so that we don't forget about it. And as others have said, a big feature of allyship is recognizing and owning the privilege that I hold, and figuring out how to use that to elevate my voice, to use my voice and really help carry the weight of oppression for and in partnership with others.
Very powerful comments. Thank you. You're right. Allies don't take a day off. People of color don't get a day off. Their allies don't take a day off. Very well said. Marisa, how about you? What does allyship mean to you?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I appreciate being a part of this conversation. So to me, allyship has to do a lot with partnership and learning the different perspectives of people and race. Working together to make and change the way we understand people in general, not just women, because men and women have the same issues. We are all the same, and as long as we work together to expand the knowledge of the injustices, then we could help other people. And if we have individuals that ally with us and help us understand the problems, then we will be able to work together.
Yeah, expand understanding, right? And we need to do that together. I think that's so important that allies are doing that together so that they know that they're well representing the needs of the folks that they're supporting 100%. Karen, I think you answered that question for us well in your opening comments. So we'll move back to the top of the list. This is when I get to read the fancy bios. Sarah told me that I could trim them a bit, but I couldn't, Sarah. They're all so good. So we're going to start with Sarah Taylor, who is the Community Liaison and Training Specialist for Eleversity, a program of Heritage Christian Services. Sarah's work focuses on corporate and organizational training and social justice issues. Sarah's 25-year career in nonprofit services ranges from direct care, frontline social work, to senior level administrator. In addition to her job with Eleversity, she's managed a consulting business for more than 20 years, providing leadership development training and capacity building services to small nonprofits and faith-based organizations, as well as managing professional conferences throughout North America. Sarah obtained her master's degree in human service administration from St. John Fisher College. She has received certificates in leadership development, completed several ministry and theology training courses, and holds ministerial licenses. Sarah also serves on numerous advisory boards and steering committees at the local, state, and national level. Sarah Taylor. So Sarah, while leading women of color projects, what has been your experience and what would you like to see from white women who desire to be an ally? Very specifically, what would you like to see white women do or do differently? Start doing or stop doing?
Thank you, Marisa, and again, everyone else joining us today. I think for myself, particularly the last 4 years, my awareness has been very heightened regarding what the need is and what we would like to see stop. And while I'm speaking for Sarah, I think I've convened enough groups and focus groups and meetings with women of color to be able to share some shared experiences. And I think one of the main things, Marisa, is trust. Trust at all levels. You know, we have, particularly as it relates to leadership and positions within organizations, you can trust us on your front line, but you can't trust us in your C-suite. You can trust us helping someone in a group home or a living, but you can't trust us with your budgets. Trusting us in those positions that we are often excluded from. So I think for me, one of the main things is trust. Really like to see authentic trust. Not where, you know, I have to think about, you know, are there emails going on, questioning what I'm doing? Or, you know, if I go over here, trust that you have given me a responsibility and trust that I have the skills, the competencies, and the tenacity to get the job done. And so I think for me, the trust, and one of the things that I would like to stop is the tiptoeing around, DEI, which this year has become more of a check the box. I'm going to do things to be politically correct. I'm going to do things, hire consultants or hire, promote, but you're promoting, but yet we have levels of microaggression, yet we have salaries are not the same. So again, I think we don't want to be a quota. We're qualified, that we are treated equal or even at a level where we are advanced in our abilities to lead. So not treating us that we're less than. And so I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. And I know, trust builds differently for people. Sometimes people trust as soon as they meet someone, and sometimes trust is something that people look to earn. But I agree with you. It's so important in any relationship, and in particular, in a growing relationship. And I like your phrase, stop tiptoeing and let's get deep into this work, right? This isn't superficial work, it's deep work. And again, I think why I so appreciate these sessions is because it lets us get deeper into the conversation and really just be honest and vulnerable. So Kate, I'm going to move to you. Kate Pellet is the Chief Operating Officer at Causewave and incoming president of the Women's Council, a Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce affiliate. In her role as COO, Caitlin is responsible for Causewave's people and operations, including HR, finance, and internal communications. Evaluating and evolving Causewave's suite of programs to ensure they are aligned with the needs of the region's nonprofit sector. Developing meaningful partnerships with nonprofits and community groups, businesses, and community leaders. Caitlin is passionate about women-focused issues, including reproductive rights, workplace and pay equity, and access to healthcare. I love this part. Some fun facts about Kate. She wanted to be a zookeeper or a physical therapist when she was little, until she learned how much science was required for both. And her retirement plans, which may be a little bit further away, but I love that you have a vision, include owning a farm where senior animals can live out their final days, including a pet donkey named Dill Pickles, Pickles for short. So remind me sometime, I have to take you to Springdale Farm. I would love that retirement vision lived out there. So with that, Kate, as a white woman, from your lens, in what ways do you consider yourself an ally? What specific things have you done to disrupt racism or racist behaviors or practices?
Thanks. So the first thing that I would say about being called an ally is that it is very much a work in progress. And that kind of relates to my the first point that I wanted to talk about around part of being an ally and considering yourself an ally is being really clear about the fact that it is daily work, and that as white women, as white people, we will make mistakes, and that doesn't mean that you can opt out of the work tomorrow. So one example of that a place where I've made a mistake in the past that I think about often, I was on a board for a women's organization, and I was the chair of the governance committee. And the organization was small and hadn't had many procedures or processes in place around governance. And that's one of the skills that I was bringing to that board. And so we were proposing a new board member to bring on that had been vetted by the executive director, had gone through this new governance process. And so we talked about that as a board, approved her to be a new member of the board. One of my fellow board members brought another candidate to the attention of the board, somebody that had volunteered for the organization. And my quick response in that moment was, that would be great. Can we see a resume? Let's, put her through this new governance process. And my fellow board member, who happened to be a woman of color, felt like this board member that we had just approved, who was white, had not been through any kind of process, and that this new board member that she was proposing, who had connections to the organization, had contributed, who happened to be a woman of color, all of a sudden was being put through a process. And the conversation was uncomfortable. It took up the rest of the board meeting. And I, in that moment, all I could think about was, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. And that's not the point of what I was trying to say. I'm just trying to adhere to this new governance process. And through a lot of unpacking, self-reflection, and working through this with others, this was a point about the difference between intent and impact. And the reality was, the impact of what I said and how I said it was what I should have been focused on. And so it was a mistake. It was a misstep. And it doesn't matter what I intended. The thing that mattered was the impact. And I had to do a lot of work to restore my relationships with people on that board. And it took a long time. And it's something that I think about a lot and talk about a lot, the difference between intent and impact. And so I've made many mistakes since then, but that one stands out. But I have not opted out of the work as a result of it. It's actually made me more focused on doing better. Another piece a thing that I try to practice is around doing the inner work to figure out ways to acknowledge how I participate in oppressive systems. So I have a leadership role at my organization. I also have a leadership role on the board of the Women's Council. And looking at systems and processes and thinking about things that I can control or change that are contributing to not allowing everyone to have equal opportunities. And so one example around that is the hiring process that we use at CauseWave. And we were struggling with getting candidates of color. And when you don't have candidates of color, you can't hire candidates of color. And this year especially, I have done a lot of soul searching around the way that I participate in the hiring process. And so what can I do differently? And the reality is, some people don't search for jobs the way that white people search for jobs. And so thinking about our recruitment processes, and how do we not be okay with the fact that our pool of candidates is white. And so one of the changes that we made is that we don't move forward with any hiring process, no matter how desperate we are to fill that position, until we have a percentage of our pool that are people of color. And what that means is we have to be really intentional and diligent about finding and talking to organizations that have access to people of color, and thinking differently about how we get the word out about open opportunities at CauseWave. So that's a change that we made to our hiring process. And the last thing that I would say, as a white woman, something that I try to practice is under the heading of intentionality. So I said earlier that as a white person, racism is not staring us in the face. And there are days that as white people, we can forget. And so I have tried to figure out ways to work this into the way that I do my job, into the way that I volunteer, so that it's not a topic that I can forget about. And so intentional, deliberate actions like making sure the topic is embedded into meeting agendas, and constantly trying to ask the question about who's not in the room, who hasn't weighed in on this topic. And the other thing that I, both at CauseWave and with the nonprofits that we work with, I try to advocate for the concept of DEI to be integrated into work versus siloed. So there's a lot of organizations that talk about needing a diversity, equity, inclusion pillar in their strategic plan. And what I'd much rather see, and what I try to advocate for, is DEI should be in every pillar of your plan, not one separate pillar. Because if it's siloed in that way, it's easily something that could be feel like we've checked off everything in that box, and so we've done our work, as opposed to thinking about how it should show up in every aspect of our work.
Excellent, excellent points. And thank you, Kate, for being so specific. I can see in the comment box that people are really appreciating the specificity. You know, you started with that experience of often making that misstep and saying something or following a process. And while you didn't intend it to be, it's perceived differently. And I once heard this illustration, which has always stuck with me. Of course, you have to imagine a time when we could actually be close to one another and walking down a hall, but imagine yourself walking down a hall and another person coming the other way. And you mistakenly look down at your phone, and in doing so, you hit shoulders with the person that you're crossing by. It should be as simple as, oh my goodness, and oh, I'm so sorry, and you keep walking, right? And that doesn't mean that you're not deeply or couldn't pursue further conversation. But when your intention is received differently, that is real and honest, and you acknowledge that and you move through that. So I really, really appreciate your specificity. I see in the comment box as well, questions. You can try to post some questions in the chat box. We are going to try to get through each panelist and have a little opportunity for questions and additional discussion. So next, Marisa Vega, who is the Vice President of Hispanic Heritage County in Western New York. Kaleida Health has been her employer for the last 20 years. She is presently the financial counselor, bilingual facilitated enroller. She's been involved in many community advocacy groups, such as the Immigration Reform of America, the Puerto Rican and Hispanic Day Parade of Western New York, financial officer for Hispanics and Friends Civic Association, treasurer for Grassroots Incorporated. She's currently a participating member of the Roswell Park Cancer Institute Diversity Council, Small Business Administration SCORE Program, Erie County Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Advisory Board, Erie County Commission of the Status of Women Advisory Board. Marisa is a motivated hard worker who enjoys family, heritage, and has a passion for arts, civic engagement, and bike riding. She established a bicycle group called Urban Bike Riders in 2015 to keep the community and families ready to move healthy and well. She's also retired as an entrepreneur owner of VP Home Improvement Contracting Construction Company. Whew, her favorite quote is, "Life is for living, love is for giving." Marisa, I would love to ask you, what ways have you seen allyship be counterproductive and white women just going through the motions?
Right. Just so you know, I get a little nervous when I'm talking in public all the time. It happens all the time.
No worries.
So I've experienced the counterproductive when the ally is not ready to when the ally is coming in between the productivity that could happen if you were together. I've had an issue one time with someone that I thought was an ally, that we had a project to do, and that ally just wasn't able to fulfill it for whatever reason. And then I had to take over that project. And then once I finished that project, you know, it was an impeccable project. It was a good turnout, and everything was good with it. That ally just started to have resentment towards me. And every time I worked with her, it just, everything was a no, or I'm not gonna do it, or it's just very negative. So now when I'm working with people and they have issues with my ability to do work, I just have to let them know that, you know, we are all able to do and work together, and we need to let our egos get out of the way so that way we could do the work for the community happen. Because when you're involved with different community projects, you don't know what type of people are going to come in between the different projects. So, so if you have somebody that you're working with and they just don't relate to the issues at hand, then you can't help them. So I am glad to say that being optimistic, being assertive, I have been able to I was able to turn her around after a while. Just by explaining to her that I am not trying to take over what you do. I am trying to do what I do and how I do it. And just because how I do it is different than the way you do it doesn't mean that I'm like being negative towards you. You should be happy that you wasn't able to do the job, but I was able to do it for you. So it's important for people to understand that we all come from different socioeconomical backgrounds, and we all come from different education levels, and we all come from different opportunities that come in the ladders when it comes to work. So just because somebody is doing something in a way better than how you do it, you don't have to be jealous. All you have to do is be happy, be grateful that they're taking the time to do the best that they can to do the job. Being Hispanic puts me in a situation that I'm not white, I'm not Black, but I'm brown. And not only that, I also have other things with me, for example, language. You know, when I was growing up, I didn't have, I never thought of being prejudiced or never experienced it. My mother is dark skinned, my father is light skinned. I never even knew color. But now I've learned the differences here and the differences that people have because of color. So it's something that I had to learn to understand, because I never knew that there was a problem. So every day I try to just be true to myself and true to my values and my values as family. And I try to treat everybody like their family, so that way we can work together. And I hope that more people will try to talk with people and work with people as if they were family, because when you think about family, you think about friendship, you think about working together, you think about having the same passions, you think about having sympathy and empathy. And if we all have a little bit of that in what we do every day, we're going to be great. So I'm glad that this I was asked to come and be a part of this discussion, because I would love to see more people to have the family oriented, and people need to learn how to understand the different perspectives and opinions of other and respect it. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Maritza, and we're blessed to have you here. It reminds me of your analogy of family reminds me of Dr. Brene Brown when she says, get close because it's hard to hate up close, right? Get close and learn to understand what you believe is different than you. And the story that you shared is powerful. And allies, you talk about being intentional. Check, and recheck. Always be intentional about your why, your what, and your how. And make sure that those are consistently linked with those that you're walking alongside. And you have to decenter yourself. It is not about the ally. And when you begin to get into a circumstance where maybe some work ego gets involved, or maybe another relationship is involved, and you start to feel it centering around you as the ally, you have to recognize that. And you have to reconcile it and move on, because it is not about you. So I appreciate your story. I think it's a common pitfall in allyship if we're not consistently intentional in being self-aware and decentering ourselves in those relationships so that we can actually have the outcome that we hope to have with the people that we're walking alongside. Thank you so much. Joni Parker. Joni started at Heritage Christian Services by working directly with people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, and she's now the Associate Vice President of Education and Employment. She served as the agency's first special educator and helped plan and open the first day program at 12 Corners on behalf of Heritage Christian, a forward-thinking program that greatly influenced day program throughout the state. She's also spearhead our involvement in the Citizen-Centered Leadership Development course through Cornell University and oversees Eleversity and the Employment Alliance. She serves as the co-vice chair on the Access VR State Rehabilitation Council and volunteers at the Webster Comfort Care Home. Joni earned her bachelor's degree in education of the hearing impaired at the College of New Jersey in Ewing, New Jersey, and her master's degree in special education at Millersville University in Pennsylvania. She holds a certificate in executive leadership from Vanderbilt University and a certificate in diversity and inclusion from Cornell University. So there you go, Marisa, you got to hear my dog snore in the background. I'm certain you all heard it. So Joni, from an organizational leadership role, how do you see the role of an ally strategically evolving?
Thanks, Marisa. You know, I feel the need to start with a little bit of a disclaimer. I'm always humbled when I'm asked to be a part of a discussion. I think people make an assumption that if you're on a panel that you must be an expert in it, and I am far from it, right? I don't know that I have all the answers. I don't know that I have the right answers. I make mistakes. I'm still learning. I do know that I like to learn. I like to study. I like to share what I'm learning. I've learned from many people in this room. And I welcome feedback. So let me just get that out of the way, and then we'll go forward, you know, with your question. You know, as I think about an organization, as I think about the work that we're doing at Heritage and what we're striving for, a working environment that's welcoming and it's inclusive, I think about all the components that should go into that, or as they sit on my heart today, right? So, you know, understanding your demographics. Sarah was hitting the nail right on the hammer when she was talking about who's in your C-suite, right? And who's in your leadership roles. Understanding our workforce, understanding our policies and how they impact our workforce, and are they inclusive? But a critical piece of that is alignment of our culture, right? If we want, it's a workforce of allies is really what is hitting my heart today. And so changes to your policy and procedure alone are not going to do it. You know, I think about promotion practices, which we recently changed our policy on promotion practices. But if we don't have cultural alignment, right? If the people that are doing the promotions, they can follow the policy and still bring bias into their decision, right? Affinity bias being a huge piece of it, but there's so many others that they can bring into it. If they're not aware of their biases, then we're no further ahead. And this alignment, it doesn't just happen because we're hoping for it, right? Or we put it in a mission statement, or we made some bold statement out there and put it on Facebook about who we want to be. It needs to be intentional. And I see an investment in learning and employee development, and need for, or an advancement of space for courageous conversation. So there's that sense of trust, so that we can do that deep listening. Sarah spoke a lot to that sense of trust. And you're right, Marisa, you just don't get there overnight. It takes time, it takes conversations, it takes people seeing that what you're saying is playing out. You know, here's the deal when I think about that cultural alignment and some of the work that we need, that needs to happen in our agency, in the community overall, is, you know, if you're always swimming, you don't know you're wet, right? So there are still people today, many white people, who don't believe racism is an issue. They think racism is something that bad person does, that it's intentional and it's malicious. And we know that racism happens all of the time because of our unconscious bias and the things we're not aware of. There's not, you know, this isn't judgment, it's just reality. So I just want to point out a few things, right? people don't understand their privilege and how it impacts. And if, especially if you're white, you're going to default, and I was there, you default to, well, I had barriers too, right? So true, we all have barriers, but barriers affect us all differently. And there's many barriers that have such a higher impact on people's life. So understanding that, I think people wear the term ally, but they don't live it. And there's research that's done. Dilotti did a research study back in 2019 that surveyed about 3,000 people, and they found that 92% of the people in that survey considered themselves an ally. But when it came down to interrupting racism or in the workplace or microaggressions or bias, only about 29% of the people said that they did it. Another third said they just ignore it, right? So that's not consistent with being an ally. I believe that we leaders need to recognize how much we don't know. There's research out there, I'm gonna just peek over here real quick, that really speaks to how having power can reduce your capacity for empathy, right? We may not know. It explains why we are more likely than Blacks to see, or less likely than Blacks to see racial discrimination, or that men are less likely than women to see sexual harassment. So, I guess in some ways, as I really think about the work ahead of us, that cultural alignment is a huge piece of it, that cultural alignment in building that workforce of allies through education, through conversations, through courageous conversations, through listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Joni. And again, I appreciate the reinforcement on active, right? That many of you have seen, right? We see the illustrations and everyone starts somewhere. There is components of becoming an ally that are more passive. We can't stay there, right? We have to move through that spectrum and we have to be active in it. I'm reminded as you shared, again, just to demonstrate some vulnerability with the group, Joni and I work for the same company. I've been with Heritage Christian 28 years. Part of my career there, I had the honor of working in workforce and talent development. And from my own lips came, you hire in your own image. We went deeply into succession planning at every single one of our program sites so that everyone in the program was rewarded if they had a first, second, and third person they were growing and developing, right? Because we knew that quality employees would groom quality employees. And there's still a lot of that makes sense. But what we were missing 20 years ago is who was in those positions and that they, in fact, were recruiting in their own image. And that created and has driven a lack of diversity in our organization for years. Nothing that was intentional. Everything that was about workforce development, reinforcing our frontline supervisors, empowering them to teach and train their own teams. Again, there's still great things in that. But just as Kate mentioned with her work at Causewave, it is about bringing not only equality, but it's about bringing equity into those policies and practices in order to move your organization forward. So thanks, Joni, for sharing some of our walk. Dr. King, let's bring it back to you. I won't reintroduce Dr. King. We heard from her in the beginning. From your perspective, discuss the role white women can play in disrupting these systems. You were so good at helping us understand the systems that impact inequity. So help us, what role can white women play in disrupting these systems through anti-racist allyship strategies? They're really active stuff.
Well, just speaking or building on what I said earlier, we have to spend more time investing in not only disrupting racism, but disrupting white supremacy and white privilege. And that's really what we have to do. We spent a lot of time talking about being anti-racist and disrupting racism, but racism is a byproduct of white supremacy and white privilege, right? It exists because of white privilege and white supremacy, right? We created a social construct to rationalize heinous behavior, right? Historically. So when we're looking at our policies and our procedures, we have to go into it with an assumption that they're rooted in white supremacy. The workplace, the space, the workspace was not designed to support women, for sure, and people of color, Black people, brown people. It was designed to benefit white men. So everything that's changed over the last 100 years, you know, any disruption that has occurred has been the work of coalition building and the demand for social change, right? The demand for social change. It's not like our founding fathers said, well, you know, I think we really should address this slavery thing. They're like, no, we're going to leave that for future generations. We're not touching that because some of us own slaves. So we know our history is complicated, but I think it's really important for us to become students of our history. So, you know, this struggle is really challenging because it happens on a systems level, but to the point that was raised by several folks, it's also hearts and minds, right? Because people run systems, people design systems, and people are the foot soldiers day in and day out in systems. You know, I work in county government. You know, we have policies and practices that need to be gutted and reimagined because they're inherently racist. You know, the civil service exam, prime example. So we have to start thinking about it differently. We have to start speaking about it differently. And that's painful, you know, and I know white people have a hard time seeing themselves, us, as white supremacists because that image has been framed as, you know, the KKK or the Proud Boys or nationalists, white nationalists. But in our daily lives and our daily practice, we have internalized this to the point where, to everyone's point, we have a choice. We can acknowledge it or we don't have to that day, right? We can be an ally that day, or maybe we don't want to be an ally because then that's going to complicate our lives. So we have to go into this knowing that it is going to take an enormous amount of energy from the heart, as well as understanding structures. They have to work together. You can't just be well-intentioned in your heart and your mind and your actions. You have to understand the way systems operate very saliently in our culture to keep things in place, right? You're talking about the policies. I think Kay was talking about for her board, right? And what qualifies as credentials, and who's credentialed, right? And how is credentialing framed? You know, HR folks have a whole system in place, right? And we're very entrenched in it. So until we start really stepping back and understanding the roots of it, we're going to have a hard time seeing real systemic change.
I appreciate that. Thank you. We've got to break down structures, and we've got to remember that allyship is about linked liberation, right? We need, and that's one of the reasons I love this kind of space so much, because it's consistently building accountability. It's consistently building accountability to be sure that we are walking together. I'd like to, and I can see you, Sarah, so you can just give me a nod. I'd love to entertain some questions even before we moved on to asking the panelists more, because there seems to be so much activity in the chat. So anybody and everybody can help me navigate the questions. I tried to start here at the top, but I believe there's a question from Alicia for the panelists. Can there be allyship without friendship? If so, how and why? If not, how and why?
I'll take a stab at it, and then I invite others to join in. I think there can be. You can be an ally in your intentions, right? We all have the power to vote. I don't have to know you to know personally if that vote's going to impact your life or not. We all have the power of where we spend our money. We may be in positions in an organization where we can evaluate policies and practices that will impact a coworker, but it may be a coworker that you've never met. So I do believe that it's possible.
Thanks, Joni. Yeah, and in order to tackle some of those systemic things, we need to be we need to be representing and be allies with people we've not yet met. Any other panelists want to comment on that?
I can say I agree that you don't necessarily need friendship to be an ally. I'll give you an example. You know, I've partnered for many years with Tracy Boff on a number of different projects, and we formed as allies. And from there, a friendship has developed, you know, so there may be friendships that develop, you know, from allyship. I have always been very clear if I was looking to form an ally partnership, I've been very clear about the purpose of it. Because I think if you're not purposeful about it, that's where you get fluff. That's where the fluff comes in, you know? So really being purposeful of what you're looking for in an ally and what you're trying to get. Many times I will ask an ally, you know, I'm not at that table that you're at that's making those funding decisions. I'm not at that table. I need an ally in the room. I need someone that understands my goal, my vision, and understand what I'm trying to accomplish, and understand that my voice may not be heard, but their voice can be heard. So it may result in friendship and it may not result in friendship, but being very clear on what is the goal, what is the purpose of forming this partnership, allyship.
Well said, Sarah. Yeah, and maybe friendship is relationship necessary. Relationship certainly helps with those accountability structures, right? Because you need to be sharing space with people who are going to be honest with you and provide really great feedback so that you're sure you're in good alignment. So those relationships really do help with that accountability. I saw Naomi asked Kate a great question, and Kate answered it in the chat. So I'd welcome everybody to look at that. And then Jocelyn, you have something brewing there. You have a question you want to bring forward.
Thanks, Marisa, so much. Okay, so I'd like to ask a question on behalf of one of my allies who's new to our community. She actually grew up in Rochester, left and went to Atlanta and accomplished amazing things, and miraculously has come back to our community. Her name is Tiffany Owens, and she's come back to be the executive director of Montgomery Neighborhood Center, which is an amazing and incredibly powerful, historically speaking, entity and community resource in the southwest quadrant of Rochester. It was part of Swan for a while and still is. But that neighborhood center has had decades and decades and generations of impact on the community Southwest. And now it's got the leadership it deserves. Now, Tiffany Owens is not here with us today. So it's a perfect example of what Sarah Taylor was just saying. She's not at the table, but I am her ally. And long before she miraculously was brought back to our community to take over the leadership of Montgomery, I've been working with them and watching them struggle and being part of that struggle. And now my question to you all is, how does somebody new to this community who has a struggling organization to run as their executive director, how does she find her way into allyship with all of you? Because I have a sneaking suspicion that the people in the room today in this Zoom session could be incredibly powerful allies on her behalf. And I can't imagine a more deserving individual and a more deserving organization than Tiffany Owens and Montgomery Neighborhood Center. So on her behalf, I ask for allyship from you all and wonder how that can be accomplished most effectively.
Excellent question, Jocelyn. Who'd like to give some counsel?
Well, we'll certainly welcome her to the table and reach out to her. And I think also coming to an organization, and I'm going to be very transparent, you know, coming back to an organization that is rebuilding their credibility in our community with funders and stakeholders is going to take some time. So she's going to need a lot of allies, a lot of allies and a lot of support at all different levels. So we definitely, I see Gwen, I see Lori, I see a number of executive leaders putting in the chat box. So I think there's plenty of opportunity, and I don't want to dominate the session, but there's plenty of opportunities in this community to network. You just got to get out. I know, sometimes when you come into an organization and you're trying to clean up and reestablish, it's hours and hours, but you gotta, at an executive leadership level, you gotta network, you gotta get out there and get some mentors and peers, and colleagues on your levels.
Thank you. Great, great, great.
Anybody else like to add to that? Panelists or participants?
I just put in the chat box, I would encourage Tiffany to reach out to the Council of Agency Executives. It's a great networking group and a lot of support from execs from every size organization. And I think a great way to get plugged into a community that, you're coming back to. And so I would encourage her to reach out to Melinda Goldberg, or I would be happy to connect with Tiffany myself and just reach out and see if she'd be interested in learning more about them.
Thank you, Lori.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you both.
It's very challenging times right now to be in a leadership position. So I'm very grateful for my colleagues that I've met through COAE, but also in different forums like this, especially, Sarah and Marisa, and I see Tracy on the line too. And I think you need support, to weather what we're all going through. And then especially if you're embarking on DEI work that you may be new to, on top of, all of the other COVID related stress.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Tiffany is absolutely the right person for the right role. And her being here is truly nothing short of miraculous. There's a comment I just saw in the chat box from Jamie Saunders, who says, I met with Tiffany within her first month in the role. She is a dynamo, and we are fortunate she took on this role. Amen. Thank you, Jamie.
Awesome. Thank you. It is an amazingly collaborative community. So this is an excellent, thank you for bringing that forward. Erica, I haven't seen you pop on my screen, but you had a really nice comment there about a word and a concept that you've learned through your experience with yoga. And I'm wondering if you'd tell us a little bit about it. And then later on, I think you had a question, the next question for me that I'd be happy to respond to.
You just want me to repeat what I had in the chat?
Yeah, I want you to say it because it's just so awesome. It doesn't, I want to hear it.
Yeah, I like the story that was told about jealousy, and I certainly have experienced that in my own life, both as a little girl and growing up into my professional career. And I had just shared a term that I use through my yoga practice called mudita. I think that's how you say it. It's a Sanskrit word, and it means sympathetic joy. Which means taking joy in someone else's good fortune or accomplishments. And I just really like the concept. We don't have a word for it in the white American culture, but it doesn't mean it's not something that we can cultivate. And I certainly try to.
That's awesome. It reminded me, I have a dear friend who happens to be a woman of color, and years ago, she said to me so matter-of-factly, that's always when the best things come to you, is when people say them with such ease. She said, I can be happy for you without being sad for me. And such a simple concept, it was so profound because of how easily she said it. She genuinely believed that. So appreciate that. I know in between there's a question about the survey, and Joni Parker has posted the information on the survey. And then Erica, you had put forward a question for me. Could you share how you changed or approached succession planning differently? I think grooming for leadership is a big issue and one I've experienced negatively as a woman, but not as a white person. So again, this group has grown, and I can't see everybody's on the call, but I'm going to be brave anyways. To be quite frank with you, we completely blew it up. Once we had that level of awareness, we completely blew it up. We do not reward our supervisors for grooming their own internal talent. Instead, we look to see inclusion and diversity. Joni laughs at me. In our organization, we call it WIDE. We don't call it DEI. We call it WIDE, Welcoming, Inclusive, Diverse Environment. Joni doesn't love the acronym. But we look to see that on every team. And we certainly reinforce supervisors who demonstrate their ability to groom leaders and allow those leaders to move on. What we shifted was, again, recruiting in your like image if your team doesn't represent diversity. And I'll be honest with you, all the way to the level of the CEO. So I was a person, quote unquote, in waiting behind the founder at Heritage Christian Services. And I believe I was 7 or 8 years in the executive vice president position, expected to succeed as a CEO. So in that time, you can imagine how much conversation we heard about CEO transition. And at that time, and it is still the case for many organizations, the expectation is really on the CEO. While it's the most important role the board may likely play, for years and years, it's expected that the CEO be the person that grooms their successor. We rewrote our succession plan. That is not what ours says. Our succession plan lays out the process to go through in the event I am unexpectedly unable to serve, or in the event I choose to not serve any longer with notice. So what our policy that our board reviews each year is about the process they would go through to ensure that they had a very, very broad approach to assessing far and wide the opportunity for CEO transition. So we've really tried to move through that at every part of the organization, every level. I see comments, you cannot just declare yourself an ally. I love the example of having an ally or a sponsor at the table. Great, I think we've gotten through all the questions, but if I missed one, will you please, if you feel comfortable, just bring forward your question, or if something else has come up that's better said than typed?
So this is Eve from Excellis Blue Cross Blue Shield. So I just want to say I kind of consider myself an ally in training, because I really just got involved, I would say, over the past year between the Women of Color Summits, thanks to Sarah for including me on a lot of the invites. So I find these very interesting and very educational from my perspective. And I was really, really happy. I think the first speaker said, we have to recognize as white women and white women leaders that we are in training and that we are going to mess up and that we are going to have mistakes. And I actually count on my DEI support system within Excellis to say, oh my gosh, I think I misspoke. And, you know, she would come back and say, yeah, you did, but you just have to recognize it, accept it, and move on. So I appreciate hearing what everyone else is saying today. And I have learned a lot. So thanks for sharing your stories. I've really learned a lot today.
Oh, thank you, Eve. Now, Eve, because you have been so active, I know I can pick on you a little bit more, because you're right. We're lifelong learners, right? And we are changing and growing, and those we're walking alongside are changing and growing, and our world is changing and growing. So you talked about one accountability structure that you have within your work environment, where you know you have people around you who are, even if they don't initiate, you can ask them, could I have said that differently? Could I have done that better? Can you tell us about other structures of accountability that you've built that are working for you personally or in your professional world? And how do you stay active while you're learning?
Sure, I'll share a story. And it was almost a challenge to myself. And then I shared it with our CEO-elect and also a couple of other colleagues within Excellis. So I challenged myself to reach out to, I'm really big into mentoring and coaching, and we have a Women's Leadership Council within Excellis, and I'm the champion of the subcommittee of mentoring and coaching. So I challenged myself, as many of you probably don't know, I'm the regional president in the Utica region. So we have a base of about 400 employees within our site. So I challenged myself to reach out to a woman of color that's on the front lines, that would normally not have the opportunity for succession planning, leadership grooming. And her and I had a conversation once that she was going back to school, and her daughter is involved with Junior Frontiers, which many of you are probably familiar with, across the Thruway. So I reached out to her and I said, you know, I'm looking at what you're doing and you're going back to school, and I'm wondering if you would like a mentor or someone who can elevate you and introduce you to different aspects of Excelis and just get more involved. And this just happened probably 3 months ago. As I would say, Sarah, thanks to you, made me think of what can I be doing differently as a leader to elevate women of color that normally wouldn't happen. So we have been, I've been mentoring her now for 2 months, and she's never did a resume, never did a cover letter, that type of thing. So now she has one. She's looking to grow within Excelis. She's putting in for a job. And I said, even if you don't get it, you're putting yourself out there, and don't feel you have to check every box when you're going for a promotion, because no one has every skill set. So I think that piece of it, and even working with our talent acquisition folks, and I took notes today, you know, on some of the things you were saying. I love that, you know, we're not going to move on until our pool is more diverse to then pick from that, because that's really challenging ourselves to say, you know what, status quo is not okay. And to use the excuse, well, we can't help it if people didn't apply. So we're just not looking in the right places. So I think it's challenging ourselves to think differently. And it's going to be okay to mess up, because again, we're all learning, like you just said, Marisa.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Oh,
It's
sure.
so helpful to just hear other people's stories. We've got just a few more minutes. So Sarah, I'm coming back to you, girl. Strategically focused, moving forward, where do you see women of color and Colorise going related to advancing opportunity for women and young girls?
Well, I want to say we're not going anywhere but up. We're going to rise, rise, rise. And I can tell you with Dr. King and with Eve, I want to thank you, Eve. Around the state, we are forming a strong strategic coalition, learning opportunities, some practices. You know, there's hundreds of leadership programs, you know, in Buffalo and Rochester, lots of leadership development programs. We can't go through any more leadership trainings as women of color, as individuals. We got it. We've gotten the education that you told us to go get. We've been to every leadership training there is. Access and opportunity. So looking at policies, we want to help look at policies. This is not just a short-term initiative. Focusing on mentorship, sponsorship, allyship. What does that look like formalized? We're partnering with Dr. King to formalize the process for allyship cohorts in training at a deeper level. No fluff, as I keep saying. And also really calling our funders, you know, how do you fund something like this? And I'm glad Jamie is in the room. Jamie Saunders, or congratulations, Jamie, in United Way of Greater Rochester, but really funding this initiative, because again, you know, establishing measurable accountability, and not just, you know, wanting staff that are qualified. They just need opportunities to lead. We're going to have the 2021 Woman of Color Summit. We expect that will be international. We are going to have our continued lunch and learns, having these uncomfortable but necessary and crucial conversations. And also, last but not least, I can't sit here and lead any initiative or encourage anyone to lead an initiative regarding just advancing women of color in leadership roles when our poverty numbers are the highest in the nation. So we can't just be concerned about women of color elevating their careers. We have to be concerned about the systemic issues around oppression and poverty. So strategically, I see it going deep in areas, but yet accountability and measurable outcomes.
Yeah, excellent, Sarah. Yeah, we've talked around it another time on intersectionality, and we've talked about intentionality, but again, linking accountability, right? Understanding that and linking accountability and making sure that we are moving forward with shared liberation. I love it. Nikisha Ridgway made a comment in the chat, and I'm wondering if she would tell us a little bit more about that. I think she's still on.
Yes. Hi, Marisa.
Hi, Nikisha.
Yeah, so my point was, let me see exactly what I was saying, is I have found in my career that people were able to, white women were able to coach me to the level of where they were, not really understanding my needs as a Black woman. So as an ally, I need people to recognize that. I need you to recognize that you may only be able to bring me so far, but you know this person and that person, exactly what Jocelyn did. I was rejoicing when I saw her speak up for Tiffany, because that's exactly what we need as a Black woman, as other women of color, as we step into this arena, this space, because the space is lonely. Like, we know that it's lonely at the top. It's even lonelier for a person of color because I have no peers there. I've had no peers within my career. I've had friends and I've had coworkers and colleagues, but I've never had other Black women at my level as I advanced within my career. So then as we step into those arenas, there's cliques. And if you're not invited in, then you're not in. You're just not in. So I appreciate what Jocelyn did for Tiffany. And that's what the point that I was making is to continue to create that space, have the courage to invite some others in, and know that, you know, I may need to connect them to Sarah or any of one of the other leaders who are participating today, because you just may not have the skill set, you may not have the time to provide that additional coaching, mentorship, or even allyship. So that's what my point was. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Nikisha, for elaborating a little bit more. You know, today I've been a little busy with moderating, but typically my fingers are working fast and furious as I'm trying to make connections, right? Connect with people's emails, find them on LinkedIn, find them on Facebook if that's where they spend time. And I would encourage that, to build relationships when we have this time and space together. And to Nikisha's point, bust open those close circles. Bust open, make introductions, welcome others in, be very, very intentional about who you're connecting with and the effort and energy you're putting into those new relationships. With that, I want to say thank you so much to our panelists. What an amazing group of women to share their time and their expertise with us. And honestly, thank you. As I said, I can't see everybody, but oh my goodness, it is inspiring to see so many people here bringing all of who they are and all of the difference in their backgrounds together to have this conversation and build these relationships. It is inspiring. And I thank you all so much. I want to wish you a very, very happy holidays. And then I'm going to tip it back to Sarah to close for us.
Well, thank you, everyone. I can't thank you enough, all of our panelists, for coming and being with us, and for everyone that had the questions. I can't thank you from all over your faces. Remember that we all have a role. We all have a role, and this conversation and strategy will continue. I put in the chat box our next Lunch and Learn is February 20th. Yes, that's Black History Month. February 20th, Lunch and Learn. Save the date, save the same time. Please, we want you to be with us. And also our Women of Color Summit 2021. It will be international, and our first planning meeting is January 6th. If you're interested, email me, let me know. Hopefully I got my email right in the chat box. Chris, help me out if I didn't. We welcome allies to the planning team. I need to say that. The Women of Color Summit is led by women of color. In the workshop facilitators and women of color, we will have some sessions on allyship and co-facilitated, but we do welcome allies to the table. And if your company is interested in supporting us in this work at Eleversity, you can reach out to me, and I can share with you how your company, if your company is interested in sponsoring any of our Lunch and Learns or partnering with us at any capacity, We are collaborators. We're looking to make a lasting a difference. This is not a one-time event. This is a movement that is going to bring about change, rising change. So thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone who joined us today, and have a wonderful, wonderful holiday. And we look forward to seeing you on February 20th. Sign your staff up, save the date now. We'll see you in February. Have a wonderful holiday and Happy New Year's.
Thank you, everybody.